No matter what form of journalism you are going to be practicing, sources are the most important facet of your career. If you want to write anything, you have to get other people to say it. We don't write our opinions. We don't manufacture things out of our head like fiction writers can. We can't rely simply on straight research. We have got to talk to real people in real time, and that's what we're going to look at now. So what is a source? Basically, it's a person, or it can also be a publication and other record or document that gives information. And while we use other documents all the time, and we use past articles for background research and to get information, this idea of interviewing real people in real time is what separates journalists from other forms of writing. And it's incredibly important that we are comfortable talking to real people and getting from them the answers that we need, because what they're going to provide us with are facts and quotes. They're going to give us the context, the anecdotes that we're so desperate for. They all come from the real people. And so a lot of times students will ask me, or they'll say, I'm going to interview a student on the street about this story. And I'm like, why? What is it that that student's going to tell you? What do you need that student to tell you? So we think about sources in terms of the information that we need someone to give us, and then we find the person who can give us that information. So you can't just interview anybody. They have to have some level of expertise for the story. And that doesn't mean everybody has to be a scientist or somebody clinical. It means that they have to have experience or some way to speak on the particular topic that you're talking about. So, one story we always talk about in class is the roommate from hell. Everybody, it seems like a large portion of every class has had a roommate from hell. So if I want to do that story, I could just walk up to any student at Ohio State and say, hi, I'm doing a story on the roommate from hell. Could I talk to you? But I run the risk that that person didn't have a roommate, they had a good roommate, they live at home, whatever it might be. So what I have to look for, and I have to ask initially, is, hey, I'm looking for somebody who's a student at Ohio State who has had a roommate from hell and who's willing to share their story about it. Now I've narrowed down what it is I want the reader to know. A lot of times I'll have people, they'll do a story on a new restaurant, and they'll find a student and they'll interview that person who will say, oh, yeah, I really want to go there. I've heard really good things about it. That person has no qualifications to be in our story. If they don't have the experience that they can relate to our readers, then they're of no use to us. So there's actually 4 things that make somebody a good source. They have to have the expertise, as we mentioned. They have to have credibility. We have to have faith in what they're saying and believe them for who they are. They have to have quote ability. So if you get someone who's going to give you, one-word answers or one-line answers, they're not really useful to you, and you need to cut bait fairly quickly on those interviews. And then accessibility. I can't tell you how many times students come back to me and said, oh, I have the greatest source. They'd be perfect. Oh, they do this and this, and they're so wonderful, and they have everything I need. And it's like, well, when can you get in touch with them? Oh, they'll be back in town in a month. Then they're not the perfect source, because if you have someone who doesn't answer your calls or is out of town or isn't willing to meet with you, that person is not a good source for you, because their accessibility prevents them from contributing. So you're only as good as the sources that you have. Any writer is only as good as the sources that they have. So you're constantly looking for sources that you can cultivate, sources that will help you balance out your story, sources that will, provide you with all of the facets that we're looking for to contribute to the story. Now, for my purposes, I never write a story that has less than 3 sources. Never is a strong word. Most often, I don't do that. I feel like you need a minimum of 3 sources in order to give a varied viewpoint. But depending on the sources, the story, I may have tens of sources, dozens of sources. I wrote a story for a magazine that was in 9 different parts, and each part needed 3 sources. So I ended up using 27 sources for that story. That was a lot of work, I don't mind telling you. But the idea is you have to get the right sources in order to give you the depth in this context, and and fill in all this information that you need. And you have to get whatever number is going to fulfill what the reader needs to know. So there's all kinds of different people who can serve as sources for you. People who are newsmakers often serve as sources, spokespeople. So if you're doing a story, as the story I mentioned before on the Columbus Arts Festival, I of course need to talk to the person who does their PR, the person who's their general manager, the mayor of the city. All those people are people who are used to being interviewed. But you also need to talk to ordinary people out in the world a lot of times, in terms of what their experiences are and what kind of context they can provide you, so that you're getting a full and well-rounded representation of this story. But the key here is sources will often get you other sources. So, find the first source. And while you're interviewing that general manager or, that PR person, say, hey, I'm also looking for sources who have done this. Can you help me out or can you point me in the right direction? And don't be afraid to, push a little bit. If you call a number and you say, hey, I'm trying to get some information about this particular event or person, and they say, oh, I can't help you. Hey, you know anyone who can help me? I'm really desperate to get some information. Can you point me in the right direction? I use a lot of social media in this case. I'll go to different groups or organizations, and I'll ask, people who are on social media, hey, are there any members who are willing to talk with me? Is there anybody that, you could reach out to for me? And you'd be amazed at how much people are willing to help you. Each source that you have should answer some part of the story, but you don't want, 5 different sources to give you the same information. You want to make sure that you have people who represent different facets of your story. Now, every piece of information that you get can come in one of 5 ways here. The most common, and unfortunately for us, is on the record. Now, I'm sure you've heard that term, on the record and off the record. On the record means the quotes and information that you're getting are able to be used, and the person who you're interviewing is willing to be quoted. I very often will ask people for their names before I start doing much interviewing to get their proper name, their spelling of their name, always their title, how they'd like to be identified, because sometimes you'll be working on a story and you will get all this great information from someone, then you'll say, hey, can I get your name for my article? And they'll go, oh, I don't really want to be quoted now. So if you put it up front that you're getting their name and they know they're being quoted, then the chances are you're going to get some great sources with great information. There are people who will want to go off the record with you, and off the record means they're giving you the information, but you can't use it in any way. So if someone says to you, look, I'll tell you this and it's off the record, then it almost didn't happen, but you're able to kind of take the information and start to figure out if there's another way for you to find the information that you're looking for. Now, the idea of not for attribution means someone's willing to give you information, but they don't want their name attached to it. You may see that in some magazines sometimes. Also, the idea of being on background, someone will give you the information, and then you can take it to someone else and say, hey, I got this information. Can you help me with it? But you can't identify who or where you got it from. And deep background is, you've got this information, and now you're going to have to start digging on your own. So, from our standpoint, for most of the stories we're working on, we're going to deal with on the record and off the record. And a lot of people will even say they want to be off the record. They don't know exactly what that means or why they're saying it. So, you can try to talk people beyond that a little bit. If they say, oh, this is off the record, but, I didn't like that restaurant. Well, that's not really necessary to be off the record. So you can kind of entice someone and say, oh, is there any way we could get this on the record to just tell me a little bit about what your experience was, and then we'll let people kind of view for themselves what they think. Now, you will get some sources who do not want to be quoted, even for what you may consider to be the most frivolous stories. So, you may want to do a story about how rats are great pets, but, you'll find somebody who doesn't want to talk about that or doesn't want to be associated with it. They're afraid of being misquoted. People think they sound stupid. Especially in news, we have a challenge where people think that we're going to be interrogating them. The more conversational, the more friendly you can be, the more you can put sources at ease, the more likely you are to get sources. So, building a source network is a great way. The first thing I do when I'm thinking of pitching a story to a magazine is I start looking on social media. I start looking on the internet to see what I can find. I start, putting out some feelers to make sure that I can get enough sources before I actually pitch that story out. I'll sign up for different blogs. As I mentioned before, I do, I like to write parenting stories, so I'm on these different parenting blogs, and I have a good friend who writes for many magazines. She's a nutritionist, constantly looking at nutrition blogs so that she can see different subjects that come up. I'm on Twitter. I'm asking people questions on Twitter. I'm looking for story ideas that are roaming out there. So, the more you can get out in the world, the more likely it is you're going to find not only good stories, but good sources to go with them. And, I also start backgrounding those sources. Who are they? Why are they qualified? I keep a record of that in case I need to use them in another story. I start developing my ideas of my questions as soon as I start encountering these sources. And I make sure, no matter what, that I get my facts straight. If I need to record the interview, and I do record all of my interviews, I make sure that I quote people accurately. I make sure that I ask them questions that are, well representative of what I need to know so that they're clear and my sources don't get confused confused or they're not sure how to answer. I also take handwritten notes of every story, and you'll need to think about the same thing about, and in class we will do different exercises on taking notes and recording, but it's important that you make sure that everything you write is factually accurate, because in journalism there is no room for error.